we're speaking with Josh Massingill, a healthcare expert attorney based out of Texas, who has co-authored some of the laws that help chiropractors today integrate in Texas and co-owning a medical entity. There's a question that comes to my mind. In order to practice peacefully, we obviously have to know for a fact that what we're doing is ethical. There's no question that the basis of everything that we do is based on our mind and our hearts being at the same level. For those of you that have been practicing for many years, you know for a fact that if you are concerned about something in the practice, it will cause anxiety. It won't let you sleep. It won't let you live happy. It'll just constantly eat you alive. So some of the things that we do to make sure that you live a peaceful life, what we call the fine art of living well, and the joy of practicing, is to make sure that things are done legally. Now, that doesn't mean you'll be successful. Having an attorney will not necessarily mean, or a consultant for that matter, doesn't guarantee you success. However, by taking the proper steps, one thing for sure, if you're doing things legally, it's one issue that you won't have to worry about. We have with us Josh Massingill, who's an expert in this field, as I mentioned. And we want to know from him, what are some of the pitfalls, as we've spoken, and you'll see that if you listen to the tape again. However, even though some of the rules may change, and I have done everything in my practice to do things, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Massingill, and we thank you again to give us the honor and the privilege to spend some of your precious time to interview you and share with us some of your knowledge. What are some other things for an integrated doctor, someone who is interested in medical integration? What are some of the things that you would advise to consider for integration?
Well, that's a great question. Man, there's so many things. One of the things that comes to mind, I guess, is insurance credentialing. So you probably know that if you're credentialed with the networks, that credential is tied to your employer ID number, your tax ID number. Oftentimes when you integrate your practice, you have to either create a new business entity or convert your entity into a different type of entity. For example, in Texas, a chiropractor can practice in a regular limited liability company. But if you want to be a medical clinic and have medicine integrated into your practice, you have to be a professional limited liability company. So you'd have to recharter with the Secretary of State. When you do that, you get a new employer ID number. And that new employer ID number, you then have to go through the credentialing process under that new tax ID. So there are some sort of hiccups that you want to be on the lookout for as it relates to insurance credentialing. Most of them are easy to solve. Typically what we do is we have the doc continue practicing out of their existing entity until we can spin up the new entity and get it credentialed, and then we just flip the switch, so to speak, and move everything over into the new entity. So there's no disruption in billing. But if you weren't prepared for that, that could be a pretty big business disruption. We talked previously about advertising rules. I think that's just another thing that people need to be very considerate of. We gave some examples previously, but again, in Texas, for example, a medical clinic has to keep on record for 2 years copies of every advertisement that it's run. There's no such rule for chiropractic clinics. So if you're used to doing your marketing in a certain way and then you integrate your practice, now you're a medical practice, you're subject to the medical board's advertising rules, and you just keep doing things the exact way you've always done it, well, you might inadvertently violate that rule by not keeping copies of those ads. So advertising rules, definitely something that you want to be very considerate of. Doctor, another thing that we've talked about in the past is malpractice insurance. One sort of trap I've seen doctors fall into is they get a medical director, and I say, well, okay, have you set up malpractice insurance? And they say, well, yeah, my medical director, he or she already has a malpractice policy, so I'm not worried about it. And that may be true. They may already have a policy. But unless you've looked at it, you don't really know. And I tell you, one way it can go wrong is that the policy could be written by their their primary company, their day job, so a hospital or a freestanding ER, and it might only cover liability for acts performed for that company, not acts that they perform for your clinic. So they may have a giant policy. It may be a wonderful policy, but it might not cover what the physician is doing in your clinic. So you want to be very careful about that. Similarly, not all policies include medical director coverage. So it might include coverage for their own medical acts, but not coverage for their acting as a medical director. That's more rare, but you want to check on that. And the answer really to, I think, all of these problems is, if you're going to use an existing policy, make sure that you see a copy of it, make sure that you're listed as a co-insured, and then make sure that the company agrees to notify you in the event that coverage lapses. So let's say the other company decides to quit paying the policy or something. You might not know about that. You need to be notified so that you know that your medical director always has coverage. So that would be another thing to consider. And I guess just briefly, one of the last things I would mention is that really you always want to make sure that proper supervision is being given to your mid-level practitioners. So many integrated clinics are going to have a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant, performing the actual medical modalities. And that makes sense from an economic standpoint because they're lower cost practitioners. So if you can use them, great. But they need to be properly supervised. And so you really need to make sure that, although it's not your job to supervise them in a clinical sense as the DC, as a business owner, you want to be making sure that the physician, co-owner, your medical director is giving them proper supervision. Because, a lot of times people focus on just the strict rules about, well, how many charts do they need to pull and how often do they need to check in and have a face-to-face meeting. And those are important rules. But just generally, you need to make sure that always your medical director is giving proper supervision to those mid-levels, because that's going to keep your patients safe. It's going to keep you compliant. And it's just your responsibility as a clinician and as a business owner.
Wow. Thank you very much. Those are great answers. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell to get my latest update.